Okay, well, hello everybody. Today we are graced with the presence of Professor Jamar Younger of Arizona State University's Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications. That is a mouthful, just to get that out. I'm glad I had it written down. But hello, Professor. Thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to go ahead and read the students your bio just to give them a little bit of background, and then hopefully it informs the questions that are going to come up. So, Jamar serves as an editor and instructional professional at Arizona State University's Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication and Arizona PBS. Prior to joining the Cronkite School, Jamar was the communications coordinator for the Arizona Charter Schools Association. He began his career in Tucson, Arizona, where he spent 8 years as a reporter for the Arizona Daily Star, covering education, public safety, county government, and neighborhoods. In addition, Jamar is the immediate past president of the Arizona Association of Black Journalists. Look at that, I can't even get all of that out without tripping over that. That's a lot. So again, welcome and congratulations. And again, thank you for being here. So I'm gonna just get right into the questions. The students had a lot of questions for you, I think primarily because you've been in the field and now you're a professor. So it's kind of a good mix of questions of the two. So we're just gonna go ahead and get right into it. Okay? All right, good. All right, so the first question is, talk to us about how you got your work noticed when you were a reporter in Arizona.
Well, so I started in 2007. You're talking about my professional career or when I was an intern? All right. I started in 2007. That was before social media really jumped off in terms of like how now you see reporters, promoting their work. And it was really before reporters became like their own brand, because social media made it aware now reporters kind of have their own brand, their own name. This was before it was a thing. So for me, it was just, I had to work really hard to just write stories that, would make it to the front page of the paper, because that was the main way you got noticed if you had an A1 or B1 story. So I started off working in a regional, like a bureau office, but, I wrote for the weekly. They used to have like main newspapers, we have a daily newspaper, but they also used to have like weekly papers that would come out. So that's how I started. So at the time, I was just happy just to have a job and be able to write for a living and see my stuff in print. But I just had to continue to work and grow and experience and grow my skills just so I could have more front page stories. Because, having an A1 story, that's how you got noticed. And if you had, more A1 stories, the more notice you got, or B1 stories, which is the metro section. So that was the main way got noticed. And, just being able to write stories that were worthy of that space. And then years later, like the last few years that I was at the paper, that's when social media became more prevalent. And I used to live tweet school board meetings, and I gained a lot of followers that way. So it wasn't just writing stories, it was also just engaging followers and engaging readers in different ways, which is a common thing now. So I basically, would do that and gain more followers and had a lot of interaction. And then I would use that channel to promote my stories. So that's where social media came in, just with promoting my story. So it just evolved over the years from, just write something that could go on the front page to, just doing things. I mean, still get big stories on the front page, but also do things on social media to engage the readers.
So do you think that maybe the front page story, at the time that you started is kind of equivalent to like going viral now, or maybe not, maybe viral for like your local area, I guess maybe, is that what, because I know there are some students that have no concept of what you're talking about, right? I mean, we have students that don't pick up papers, and I'm not saying for lack of awareness. That's just not where they're used to getting their news.
Right.
But I mean, just to try to kind of put it in context, you know, because obviously going viral is much broader, but I'm guessing for a local area, being on the front page of a local newspaper, that's kind of like, okay, that's the big talk around where you are, right?
Exactly.
Okay, all right. So that was the goal, I guess, that was your goal or similar goals, similar reporters' goals to get that front page story, basically.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I mean, I know some of them will understand it, and if they're studying journalism or communications at all, I mean, you still have to kind of know the history of where things come from. But I know a lot of times I'll ask students, where do you get your news from, or do you subscribe to a newspaper? And they're like, huh, what's that? You know, it's like, you know what a newspaper is. You might not subscribe to it, but you know what it is. But yeah, where they're getting their information mostly is, like you mentioned, it's on social media. So it's just a lot different now than, like you said, when you started, and even when I started, it's just a lot different. So, okay, cool. That's good to know. All right. So the next student wants to know, what advice would you give what advice would you give future reporters or students considering the field?
I think most importantly, you still have to be a good reporter. Journalism is still journalism, whether it's through social media or through the traditional means. So you still need to know how to report a story, know how to build sources, build relationships. So I would say focus on just being a good journalist first. Um, and it's important also to be a good writer. Even if you're going into broadcast, you still want to be a strong writer. So just focus on journalism principles, make sure you're a strong writer, and then learn some other skills as well. Like if you want to write for a website or a newspaper, still learn how to do video, or learn social media audience and analytics. Or if you're a broadcast person, then learn, do some print stuff as well. Just learn as many skills as possible, because a lot of these jobs, they require like multiple skills. Like newspapers are hiring video producers, and they're hiring social media editors and audience engagement editors. So there's a lot more jobs and roles out there, but just learn as much as possible, just so you can make yourself more versatile, more marketable.
Okay. And I mean, we're kind of hearing the same theme kind of echoed. The last person that we interviewed, you know, the students were very surprised. She was a news reporter for a local station here in the Hudson Valley, and the amount of work that she did on her own. I think she said her day started at like 5 o'clock. Now she's on on TV, but I think she said her day started like at 5, and at 9 o'clock she was still checking social media, and that the students were really surprised how much work went behind the scenes. They also were surprised at how important the writing is, and I'm glad you said that again. They all think that that's just my own personal thing. It's like, it's not my personal thing. You have to know how to write.
Right.
You got to know how to write for just about anything, but especially for this, it needs to start with that, right? And then, like you said, that you're your own brand. In some cases, you're your own marketing team and everything. So that's excellent advice. The more that they know how to do individually, right, the more employable they are. So it's not just telling the news or reporting the story or even getting the interview, but it's like, if you can do it all, like if you can be your own station almost, then you're probably going to be,
Especially all these social media channels. I mean, you got news organizations and reporters doing journalism stuff on TikTok now, and Instagram, and reporters with their own Facebook pages, which was starting when I was still in. And obviously Twitter is like the biggest one when it comes to reporters building followings. But yeah, I mean, like you said, you become your own brand, so it's important to have those skills to be able to leverage that.
Okay, all right. Okay, so the next student wants to know, how did you get your interviewee to accept your invitation to be interviewed?
Well, it depended. Because like you have like two different sources. Like you have government sources, or like people who they're used to being interviewed. So that's not as much of a big deal. The bigger deal is preparing for it, because since they're more media savvy, they're going to try to control the interview and control the content and control the message themselves. But I was also, when I was a cops reporter or public safety reporter, I had to interview a lot of families who, homicide victims, or families of people who died in shootings, or or crashes or things like that. So I just try to be empathetic and just treat them like a human being and say, look, I know this is tough, but I really want to write this story just to kind of let people know who they were, and the story can honor their memory, and just be empathetic, and be respectful, but still, kind of do what you can to try to get them to talk, you know, um, not in a manipulative way, obviously, but just let them know that why you're doing the story, and just the importance of it and the significance of doing that story. And most times it worked, sometimes it didn't, but you always want to just try to empathize with people and let them know you realize how hard it might be to talk, but it's important because a lot of people can gain from what they have to say. So it's just important to emphasize that.
Right. And I mean, and yeah, that totally makes sense, because a lot of times, like you said, you were interviewing people at very, vulnerable moments for them, right? And so if they didn't feel that you cared, why would they talk to you?
Yeah.
Why would they open themselves up unless they really felt like, you really had their best interests at heart, and you were going to try to put the best story out there, So
Exactly.
I think
Another
empathy is,
one-
yeah.
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead. Empathy is crucial.
Oh yeah. Also, just if it was like a negative story about like a public official, because I wrote a lot of those, or like an investigative story, you just emphasize that this is a chance to get their side of the story in. You don't want them to control the message, but you want to let them know, hey, I'm writing this story, I investigated this. This is your chance to respond to it and clear things up. So that's also another point I wanted to make.
Okay, all right, that's actually pretty smart. Tell them to kind of get ahead of it. I think that's one of the, I think I heard that on TV, get ahead of the story, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I know I heard that maybe on Scandal or something, I don't know. But anyway, now I'm telling my age. All right, can you tell us one of the hardest parts about being a news reporter?
I think it's just I think nowadays it's just people telling you that you don't know the truth, even though you spend all this time interviewing people, researching, attending meetings. I think a lot of times it's just the criticism that comes from the public, especially now, just with all of the anger and people, calling things fake news, and just all the attacks on the media. A lot of times that's what it is attacks. Obviously there's a grind with writing these stories, trying to get people to talk, not trying not to get, trying not to be buddy buddy with people, but being, open and friendly, but still letting them know that you have a job to do. There's always a grind with that, just when it comes to building relationships with people, and building trust with people. But I think nowadays, on top of that, is just all the attacks, um, just, on the media, and kind of how a lot of people don't trust the media, or they hate journalists, and they send these mean Facebook messages, and you see videos of these protests of journalists getting attacked or getting spit on, or just people coming after them and yelling at them. So it's those are some of the more challenging things right now, in addition to just the everyday grind of trying to meet the deadlines, build trust, build relationships, and things of that matter.
Right. Wow. Yep. I mean, that all makes sense, especially given the climate we're in right now. So I guess this kind of feeds into the next question, and I didn't even do that on purpose. But question is, since we all know that reporters will encounter some unexpected things during an interview, how did you deal with that?
Depends on what it is. I think when you approach an interview, you prepare, you do your research, you have your questions ready, but you always be ready for anything that might change the angle of the story, or any new information that you learn. So if you're writing about, I don't know, some education initiative, but then you find out it's something different than what you thought just through conversation, then you just kind of refocus and just kind of think on your feet and really probe into, like, well, what's going on? Why is that? So you have to be prepared, but you also have to be flexible, when it comes to, approaching these interviews, and just be prepared to, recognize anything that might change the complexion of the story. And from there, just try to think on your feet and just probe and ask the deepest or most toughest questions or most probing questions as possible.
Okay, all right. So let's see here. Oh, this is a good one. Wait, I think I need to put my glasses on for this. Make sure I read this right. Okay. Do you think more students should pursue formal journalism, like being a reporter for a reputable or vetted newspaper or station, or do you see the future more leaning towards social media and podcast type of journalism? And I think you kind of already talked about that a little bit. I don't know if you wanted to say anything more about it, because you did kind of speak on that a little bit earlier.
I don't know. There's a lot of opportunities out there. People have said journalism is dying, but I don't think that's the case. There's a lot of opportunities out there. Podcasts are huge. There's a lot of nonprofit news organizations now that focus on different mediums of journalism. Blogs have always been huge. Social media as well. I guess it depends on just whatever you're interested in. If you want to have a podcast, I think there's opportunities to do that. You just need to know who your audience is and what you want to talk about. But I think still, no matter what, the backbone is still just knowing the principles of journalism and just being a good journalist, and just knowing how to talk to people, knowing how to search public records. If it's like sports, knowing how to navigate that world, so I think no matter what, if you have solid journalism principles, then you can pretty much do whatever you're interested in. So yeah, I mean, social media is huge, podcasting is huge, but I think there's still some opportunities out there in print and in broadcast as well, so.
Okay. Because what it sounds like is if people have a desire to tell stories, whether it's their own personal stories or the stories of others, or if they're advocates or what have you, there's a lot more outlets to do that, as opposed to maybe before, if you wanted to be a journalist, you knew you were either going to be writing papers or, possibly be on TV or whatever. But like you're saying, there's podcasts, there's, YouTube, people are, like you said, tweeting and on TikTok and all of these things I probably don't even know without asking my kids, right? So if you really have that yearning and that desire, then there's a lot of different ways to do it. Basically, is kind of what I'm hearing. Okay, all right. Well, that's good for students to know, and also that they don't necessarily have to pursue, I think, English per se, or journalism per se, or communications per se, like you mentioned earlier. Let's say they love, the behind the scenes work, they like video production or whatever, they can still be storytellers, in that way. Maybe not in the same traditional way that we would see a journalist, but that's still journalism. If you're telling a story, to me, you're a journalist. I mean, that's just kind of
exactly.
So okay, all right, that's good for them to know. So why did you choose to work for your specific news organization when you were still reporting the news?
Well, when I was still in school and about to graduate, I knew I wanted to work for a newspaper. I thought I would have to actually start out in a smaller town. Like I was actually looking at coming back east, and maybe working in like a small town. I think I saw openings in like Scranton, for example, like Scranton, Pennsylvania, like for students out there. I'm from Philadelphia. So I was looking at like different little cities like that and thinking I would have to start out somewhere small. Also I had discussions with a paper in this small town in Arizona that's about an hour north of Phoenix. But I had done an internship at the Arizona Daily Star, and they offered me a job, when I graduated, and it was a mid-sized paper. There was at the time, there was like just under 1 million people in that metropolitan area. And then it grew to close to 1 million. So I just felt like, this is a great opportunity, and it's a bigger city than where I thought I would be.
That's awesome. I mean, to hear that you were interning and that they approached you, right? You weren't out there. You didn't have to go pound the pavement. I guess people don't pound the pavement anymore. Now it's like online, but you know what I mean. But they obviously saw, your work ethic and knew that you were qualified because you worked for them, right? So that's awesome. So the job almost kind of came to you in a sense. You didn't have to go select it.
Yeah. They took a chance on me as an intern. I did well there. It was a summer internship. And like later that fall, right before I graduated, they, wanted to hire me. So
That's awesome. That's really awesome. So the next question is, what inspired you to become a news reporter or, want to pursue journalism in the first place?
I knew when I was young, going back to middle school, that I like writing. And I just asked the English teacher in 7th grade, like, what career allows you to write? She was like, journalism. I was like, that's what I want to be. And then it's like that simple. And then I joined. I attended an arts high school in Philly, and majored in creative writing. So I had really started taking journalism classes when I was 14. I took a little detour. Like I graduated from high school, went to Philly Community College. Then I joined the Army, and I was out of school for 5 years. I did construction stuff. Then I went back, but I had always knew that I wanted to do something where I could use, something where I was, pretty, where I had a talent at. I just wanted to utilize my talents. And journalism allowed me to do that. But I knew pretty early on that it was a career that I wanted to pursue.
That's awesome. You knew early, but like you said, you didn't have a direct path. You kind of went and did a couple other things. And then I would imagine being in the military might have informed that a little bit too, because you probably saw things and experienced things and maybe had stories you wanted to get out there. Or at least maybe it fed that journalist inside of you, even though you weren't actively pursuing it, at the time.
Yeah, I definitely learned a lot and gained a lot, and I'm grateful for that experience. I worked in, I did like telecommunications, like telephone stuff, like cabling and wiring, which that doesn't exist like it did back then, but that's what I did. So yeah, definitely widened my perspective, and I also felt kind of disconnected from what I really wanted to do in life, and so it was like I need to get back into that because otherwise I won't be, as happy, as I would be,
So it actually helped to solidify it for you, basically, when you when you weren't doing it. Okay, all right, that's good to know. So this is kind of a fun question. I think you touched on it just a little bit earlier, but how does it feel to see your name in the paper on one of the stories that you reported on and written? Like maybe that first time you saw your name, how did that feel?
Felt awesome. The first story that I reported, I actually wrote a story. So I started back at community college out here in one of the Phoenix suburbs, Mesa Community College. And I started writing stories for that paper. I just went to the newsroom and said, hey, I'm a journalism major. I want to get into this. Can I write for y'all? They was like, of course. So yeah, I remember when it came out, when the paper came out that day, it was a bi-weekly paper. I picked it up and I was like, yeah, and it was awesome. I held on to it and put it away somewhere. I don't think I have it now, but back then it was like, I just kept looking at it, looking at my byline, like, yeah, this is awesome. It was just a special moment. And it's still pretty cool. I don't write as much. I don't write as many stories now, but, I did write a story a couple of summers ago, in the wake of the protests for like PBS has a promotional magazine, and I wrote about some of the activism in Arizona. And when that came out, I was like, oh, that's cool. It was just great to see it again and great to write that story. But yeah, I don't think I'll ever get tired of that. I don't think most reporters will ever get tired of that.
I'm glad you said that because I feel the same way. Whenever I see my name on anything, whether it's online and something I've published or whatever, I don't think you get tired of that. Because it's like a sense of pride, that's your work. Your name is there, everyone knows it, hopefully it lives forever, right? So that's awesome. And I just love that students ask that question. I'm gonna go to some more, and I have quite a bit, but I'm not gonna be too stingy with your time. Oh, here's a good one. How do you manage the stress of being a news reporter?
That's a good question.
I mean, we're assuming, or at least this student is assuming it is. Is it stressful being a news reporter?
Yeah, it can be, without a doubt, especially when you have those days where you have multiple stories and, you're in deadline and you might have a 12-hour day, or you have to scramble to get some last minute information because you're on deadline. And if you don't get the information, the story won't be as good, or you may have to see if the editor can hold the story till you get a hold of the person. Especially the biggest stress sometimes is people calling you back, and just getting a hold of sources. But as far as managing the stress, I mean, I enjoyed it so much that I really didn't mind the stress. I embraced it. But I definitely made sure to just have a full life, because when you report, it becomes when you're a journalist, it becomes a part of your identity. It's not just a job. And I knew one reporter when I was in Tucson. She used to say that she was a journalist 24 hours a day. And I didn't really go that far, but I definitely felt like, yeah, it's definitely a part of your identity. And even if you're out hanging with friends or at a restaurant or whatever, you talk to somebody and you still like building relationships, you still can get story ideas from conversations. So as far as managing the stress, I definitely took time to just do things that I like. My off time, was my off time. My weekends were my weekends. I mean, if something came up, then I was ready to jump in, or I always had my ear to the ground. But, I definitely tried to look for that balance, and not be 100% on the go like all the time.
Right. No, I can definitely identify with what you're saying. I know when you're a writer, especially when you write nonfiction, a lot of times people are always concerned they're going to be your story. Sometimes I notice, I don't know if that happened with you as a reporter. I know that's happened to me where, don't write about me. Don't write about this. I don't want, it's like, first of all, you're not that important. No, I'm playing. But I mean, everybody is not going to be a story, for you. But I definitely ran into that. And I would imagine being a reporter and people know you're a reporter, that might happen as well. But like you said, you do have to have the balance. And obviously, if you're off and then there's a major story that breaks, then of course you're gonna, pursue it. But I'm sure, having that balance, you would have to, because as we were discussing in the last interview, like you mentioned as well, with all the negativity out there, in the way that people come at people in the media now and feel entitled to. You would have to step back and take a break and have that time to detox or woosah or meditate, whatever you're going to do, because otherwise, how could you function and perform with all of that 24/7? Like, there has to be some pullback time. So that's really cool that you were able to do that, which is kind of feeding a little bit into this next question, which is how do you handle a hostile or uncooperative, interviewee? What do you do?
I think first of all, you just have to keep you cool, and not try to start going tit for tat with them. But you still have to like push them and not let them push you around. Say, hey, I'm doing a job. Like, I'm not just here playing games. Like, you want to answer the question or not. But you can't like start flipping out or snapping on people, even though sometimes you want to. I know I wanted to.
The human.
Yeah. But yeah, you just have to keep you cool, but still be firm with what you're looking for and firm with the questions you're asking, and not let them bully you into not doing the story or not getting the answers that you need. And just keep you cool, but don't back down.
I think that's really important that you said that, because I think that a lot of
times we, as viewers, take for granted that everyone is going to be cooperative and, nice and polite and all that. And obviously you're dealing with people, you're dealing with human emotions. You don't know what that person is going through or what's happening in their life. Like you mentioned, the empathy, earlier. But I think because of most of what we see up until recently, wasn't as hostile, that you don't necessarily think that you might really run into an interview, someone that you need to interview that maybe might not want to be interviewed, or maybe like you said, they're kind of bullying you around. And in particular, when you mentioned earlier, which I never thought of, it's key when you're interviewing professional people that are used to being interviewed or used to being on camera, you know, that they might try to control the narrative, and your job is to make sure that they don't, right? That you're controlling the narrative always. And I just don't think that a lot of times there's a lot of thought to really what's going on behind the scenes and all the different things you have to do, right? And in a role like that. So I appreciate you sharing that with our students. So another student wanted to know, how is it different working in the field versus the newsroom?
Well, I think when you're in the newsroom, it's kind of a safe space in a sense to where you can express things to your colleagues that you might not want to say in public. Not that you would say anything like unethical or bad, but you know, you all can relate to each other in terms of, you know, just what you're dealing with out in the field. You know, when you're in the field, you know, you want to talk to people, but you don't want to give any sense of bias, and you don't want to be biased regardless. But you know, you just, you know, like with me, when I go in the field, you know, I was friendly and open, but I was like reserved, and I just wanted to learn about, you know, the source and be open-minded as much as possible, just so I could be fair when writing the story. And in the newsroom, I'll just talk to my editor and talk to my colleagues and like, yeah, this is getting on my nerves, or this story is getting on my nerves, or, you know, like, how did you deal with this source, you know, or I have to talk to this person, you interviewed them. So how did you deal with them, or how was your experience dealing with them? So there's just a lot of teamwork, a lot of collaboration, and hopefully you're getting good. Hopefully you work with a good editor that gives you support. But yeah, you know, it's just a space where you can just kind of, you know, go to people who's going through the same thing that you're going through.
I love that you said safe space too, because that really is what it is. Now you're working with your colleagues, people that know, you know, what you're going through and what it's like. So yeah, you could just be honest with them, like you just said, this interview is getting on my nerves or whatever, you know, and you don't have to worry about that getting back. You know, it's in that safe space. And I wonder now, with a lot of journalism or a lot of journalists that maybe are working more remotely, you know what I mean, or you know, working from home, or working maybe in the field with just, you know, the one person. I wonder if they've lost some of that because they're kind of just either out, you know, like in the midst of everything, or just alone, you know, or in their personal space at home. And if they've kind of lost a little bit of that safeness because they don't have the other colleagues around, you know, to kind of rally and support.
Camaraderie.
Yeah, I you know, I never even thought about that, because I mean, ideally everybody, or mostly everybody, wants to work from home or work remotely, or you think you do, until you realize there's a whole social aspect that you no longer have, and you just can't have all of that over Zoom, right, or on Slack or whatever, right?
Exactly.
So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that does speak volumes for being, you know, in person, especially in certain professions. So the next question is, I like this question. Which do you prefer? Do you prefer being a professor of journalism or working in the field as a reporter, and why?
I've never thought about that. I definitely miss working in the field. I don't know if I have a preference, because I definitely miss working in the field, but I don't miss all the stress that can come with it. And as a professor, I can, you know, kind of share my lessons. I really enjoy it. I really enjoy interacting with the students. I've had some great students over the years. I've watched some of them go and be successful. You know, just the conversations, you know, the thing about college students is that you all, for the most part, you want to be, especially when you're getting into your major, you know, you want to be there, you want to be in those classes. And I really appreciate that. So there's different things I enjoy. You know, I definitely enjoy the interaction. And sometimes I miss, you know, the rush that comes from being a reporter. But I say right now in my life, I'm definitely content with where I'm at. So there's different preferences to both. I'm definitely think where I need to be right now in my life.
Well, and I love too that that you also went to community college. Before the last reporter we interviewed, same thing. And I think it's important because not only is this a community college that I'm at, and the students that are taking these classes, but I think it's important for students to always know that there's not one direct path to anything. And a lot of times the 2-year, the 3-year school, or whatever they call it. There's so many names for community colleges, but basically, when you're not attending a 4-year university from high school, a lot of times students, have issues with that, or feel that they didn't, perform the way that they were expected to, or they're not successful in the way that they might have expected to, or whatever. There's all kinds of feelings behind that, but to know that regardless of what you want to do, you can do it. And sometimes, you get these experiences and these opportunities, like you just mentioned, when you were at Mesa, that you're able to, work at a local paper while you're still going to school, or you might be able to intern like you did once you were at ASU. Like, there's all these opportunities, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And no one has to have like a straight, direct 4.0 from high school, transferring to Harvard, and then, getting this career. Like, there's just all these different paths to do what you want to do. And I think that's really important for students, especially right now with so many people struggling just to even stay in school, to pay for their tuition, and all of that, and not accumulate this crazy debt, that they know, right, that there's just different ways to go about it. So I just appreciate you saying that in particular, because we're in a community college. So
yeah, for sure. I owe my success to my time there. I got my internship with the Star, which led to my job. I got that internship off the strength of the work I did at the community college paper. So like, don't think that something is that low level. If you do good work, it'll, ultimately, hopefully be recognized. So yeah, I definitely owe a lot to my experience in community college.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love that. I tell my students all the time, I'm an advisor first. I'm a counselor first, you know what I mean? And so I'm always going to be a community college alumni. So I mean, I just love that. But I have a few more questions, and then we're going to let you go. But I really do appreciate the time that you've spent with us so far, Professor. So as we all know, or we should know, it's February, Black History Month. And my students know that I have 4 children, 3 boys, 1 14, 28, 1 30, or close enough, right? If I'm wrong, they're gonna be mad at me. But I have 3 boys and I have a grandson. And so that's kind of where this question comes from. This question is from me. So as a Black male professor of journalism and a former reporter, not to mention being the past president of the Arizona Association of Black Journalists, how do you feel about the media coverage of Black men and the media coverage that they receive?
Well, I feel like when you look at, I feel like there's still some struggles with the way that we're portrayed. So like when you look at like George Floyd, you look at the police coverage, I feel like a lot of that is some of that is improved because you see more reporters getting into systemic racism and the systemic issues that lead up to these incidents and lead up to the circumstances in these people's lives. So I definitely feel like there's a lot more a lot more journalists willing to investigate the systemic issues and the systemic racism and how that factors into the lives of Black men as well as women and other people of color. But I still feel like, and you're also hearing the more media outlets as well, hiring more diverse, Black leaders, Black journalists, so on and so forth, and other organizations making pledges to do so. But I feel like the leadership it's still not diverse enough in newsrooms. There's still lack of Black leaders and other people of color, Latino, Indigenous in newsrooms. It's just, you still can see a lot of these same narratives around Black men. You still have journalists trying to treat some of these issues like, there's both sides to them. So, I mean, overall, I think there's been some improvements when it comes to digging into these issues with, systemic issues, and especially in regards to the Black men and police shootings and just our circumstances in general. But I still feel like there's still a lot of problematic images out there with the way that we're portrayed. And it's still a battle. It's still a fight,
Well, it's kind of almost like you read into my next question. But, in speaking of, the George Floyd murder, I look at that as the defining media event of 2020. I mean, there were certainly others, but I think just in terms of how, that murder being captured on camera and then shown throughout the world, really changed a lot. And I just wonder, do you think that there's been any positive that has come from that? And you kind of just touched on it a minute ago, but I mean that particularly because, there are some students out here, depending on their age, that, they might not have known about the Black Lives Matter, movement prior to George Floyd, or they might not have ever experienced a protest outside of reading it in a history book, right? But when that happened, all of that was on display for the world to see. And I just wonder if you think because of the coverage, that things are better now, not just for, Black men, but, people of color in general. Do you think that was like maybe a catalyst moment? Or do you think that, it kind of happened and it was unfortunate and that was in 2020 and now we're kind of back to where we were prior?
I feel like that was a turning point. I feel like that things have improved. And like I mentioned in the previous answer, you're starting to see more investigations, into, the systemic issues. And I mentioned that because it's intertwined, because they're digging deeper than, just, the stereotypes of Black men and, women as well. So it's definitely starting to improve. And what you're also seeing is more people, Black journalists, as well as some white journalists and, other Latino and Indigenous as well, calling things out. They're starting to call out their newsrooms for, mistreatment or, the way certain stories are published. You're starting to see a lot of things really called out on social media. And I feel like that's playing a huge role. So I feel like there's been some growth, but there's still a lot more improvement that could be made.
All right, well, yeah, I just felt like I had to throw that in there because, I mean, we have, a lot of students of color on this campus, but also a lot of advocates, a lot of people that don't look like us that are still down for the cause, and we need them, you know what I mean? We need all of us to kind of be in this together. But like I said, before I even asked the question, because I'm a parent first, you know what I mean? And I have 4 children, but 3 sons, this is something that I feel is personally my responsibility in reporting or in some of the stories that I tell, that I'm always kind of thinking of that first, how are we being portrayed? And it's not always that there has to be negative too. There's a lot of good out there. There's a lot of positive out there, but unfortunately we don't necessarily see that as much. So I feel like it's kind of on us to bring those stories out as well. So it's not always the negative stuff, that people know we're all well-rounded people, you know what I mean? Instead of it always being.
And I think the biggest thing is, when it comes to the coverage of Black men as well as the other issues, is that you're starting to see more stories that kind of digs deeper into their lives and show more nuance. Yes. Instead of just, another Black man was shot or another Black man shot somebody. There's been more stories, just going into the lives of these Black men. and how whether the system affects them or their successes as well. You're starting to see more of that, but it's still problematic. You know, we still don't get the coverage that we deserve
Right.
when it comes to especially positive stuff or just more nuance.
Well, I'm really optimistic though for the future, and I think, you know, students in my class and just, you know, just people in general, I think, you know, everybody kind of knows now. If they didn't know before, they know now, right? And I think we can expect things to continue to get better, even though obviously, like you said, there's still these pockets and there's still issues and there's still the systemic racism. All of those things still exist, but we have more people aware now, and I think we have more advocates in the fight. It's not just us, you know what I mean? So I feel like the more people are involved, regardless of their skin color, you know, that they can help, and I'm optimistic for that. So I'll just leave it there. But I just want to tell you, thank you very, very much. Like, seriously, thank you so much for the time and for your honesty. And I'm sure the students will get a lot out of what you shared with them today. They might even want to reach out to you. I don't know how you feel about that, but you know, I think it's nice when they do, because it's awesome to have someone, you know, that they can actually ask a question that knows, right? You've been there, you're doing it now, you're a professor now, and you're still writing. So I think the more connections our students have with people that are doing this work, the better the whole industry is, you know, overall. So we definitely thank you and appreciate you for your time.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you all, and anybody out, all these students, to the students out there, stay in touch. You know, I can share my email. I think Sharisse has it. But yeah, feel free to share it. And if you have any questions, just reach out to me.
Okay, I'll definitely do that. But other than that, I think we're good to go. But thank you again